A really warm welcome. Can everybody hear me? Just nod, do this. Okay, many thanks. Um, uh, a really warm welcome to everyone. And under normal circumstances, we would have been in a really large group doing this. Under COVID conditions, obviously we're doing this session. So I just want to say a bit about the Community Watch, which has kind of commissioned this work, working with the Rights and Equality Council, and particularly to welcome Yemi and Ben. So I'll say that. And so I just want to give a bit of an introduction to Community Watch and the reason for this event, and also that we're hosting some other events as well. So about 75 people have registered on this event, which is great. So we'll keep admitting them as they come in. There are about 30 of us at the minute. Community Watch is funded by the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office. It's a community-led partnership bringing together different agencies, but primarily set up to bring the different community safety initiatives together, ideally under one umbrella. So the likes of Community Watch, Street Watch, and other community safety initiatives, with a view to kind of collaborating carefully around what communities are saying that is needed in community safety terms. And the origin of this was when we had the very high spike in gold burglary about a couple of years ago. And a lot of lessons learned, I think, by agencies and ourselves about listening into communities and responding to that. So this project is again funded by the Crime and Police Commissioner, with a view to us having to deliver days of action. These would have been physical days of action pre-COVID, but this is one of the days of action in Zoom terms. And we were particularly concerned about the very high rise in hate crime, which you'll hear from Yemi, who's our local hate crimes officer, and the implications of that for Northamptonshire. And Ben Smith, a very warm welcome, Ben, to you, who's officer in Leicester City Council, but with a remit to kind of collaborate across regions and national kind of perspectives as well. And is, I think, funded by the Home Office, so you work very closely with the Home Office as well. So it's a really important event for us locally, and I'm really pleased that there are so many of us kind of listening into this today. And we've got some other events on the 4th of September. We've got a Safer Streets event, again in response to gold burglary. The PCC's office have secured over £500,000 for the Victoria Ward and Eyes Ward to make the area safer, which is an amazing achievement. So that event will actually show practical plans to communities about what security measures can be put in place. On the 1st of October, we're doing the Black Lives Matter event, again hosted by NREC, and we'll give further details of that, I'm sure, kind of later, or you should receive that already. Can I just thank Anjana for kind of pulling this together? It's really challenging to do this online, but bear with us if we don't get all the technical stuff right, but we'll do our best. So I'll hand over to Anjana.
So thanks for that, Tina, and also thanks for your input into the event. We've got, we're hopefully going to be having quite a lot of information today and hearing a lot about Northamptonshire, but also wider afield. So I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to Yemi Holman's the Northamptonshire Police Hate Crime Officer. She does an absolutely sterling piece of work, and she's going to tell us about the local situation. So take it away, Yemi.
Thank you, Anjana, and thank you to everybody for having me this evening. Can you all hear me okay? Brilliant. Okay, so as Anjana said earlier, I am the Force Hate Crime Officer for Northamptonshire Police. And for those of you that don't know me or have never worked with me, I'll just give you a quick overview of what my role actually entails. So I'm a single point of contact, so I'm the only person in the organisation that does my job, and the main parts of my job are monitoring our hate crime levels, making sure that as an organisation, Northamptonshire Police identify hate crime effectively and we record it when we need to, that we investigate hate crime properly and we identify the risks and vulnerabilities that are associated with hate crime. A big part of my job is around our victim support and making sure that we're victim focused when it comes to hate crime, and also making sure that offenders and perpetrators of hate crime are brought to justice. So that's sort of like an overview of what I do. And I know that today we're really looking at online hate and how recent events have impacted on that. But what I wanted to do just initially was to go over what the national and local context of hate crime is at the moment, and has been for sort of the last 12 months. So it gives us an idea of where we're going from. So the most recent data that we've got from the Home Office is data for the period of 2018 to 2019. And that report showed us that we had just over 100,000 hate crimes in England and Wales reported to police, and that saw about a 10% increase year on year. But I think what's really important that we consider when we're talking about hate crime levels and hate crime figures is that we know we have a reporting gap when we talk about hate crime reports. And the crime survey for England and Wales suggested that that gap is around 50%. So we only know about 50% of the hate crime that's taking place. Only 50% of victims feel confident enough to report to police, which for me is a worry. So what we've seen as well for the last 5 years, locally and nationally, is big increases in hate crime reports. So between 2013 and 2018, we saw over 123% increase in hate crime reports. So they've more than doubled in that period. Race is the strand that is reported the most, which equates to about 75% of all hate crime. Again, that's nationally and locally. And I think it's really important that we think about why that might be. I'm just going to share my screen, okay? Right. Okay, so the reasons that we don't know about, sorry, hang on, let me just move that. So the reasons that hate crime levels are increasing at such an alarming rate, there's a number of reasons. So we're better at identifying hate crime, so we're better at recording it as a police force. But there's other key things that impact on hate crime levels. And I've put a slide up that is taken a snapshot from 2016, because I think it's a really good indication. Now, we know that national events, locally and internationally, will impact on hate crime levels. So we know that key political dates, for instance, like the EU referendum and Brexit, will have an immediate and significant impact on hate crime reports. And also the same is said for terror attacks. So 2016 was a really good year for us to indicate how those events impact on hate crime. Now, this is a national graph here, but locally in Northamptonshire, our trends really mirror that as well. So when we had the EU referendum, we saw a massive increase. And again, whenever we have terror attacks, we see that locally as well. So on a local level, are our figures exactly the same as national in terms of our increases and our percentage increases? And actually, unfortunately, they're not. They're a bit higher. So in the last 12 months, if we look around figures that are happening locally in Northamptonshire, we've seen an increase of hate crimes and incidents of around 23%. So a bit above that national average of 10%. And that actually equates to around 328 crimes. So for me as a hate crime officer, I'm looking at what those types of crimes are and why are they happening. And when we focus on and we think about online crimes, that's a big percentage of what we've seen in the last few months in particular. Let me just move that. So when we talk about online crime and online hate speech, what do we actually mean? What are we talking about? So a post that is hostile towards a person's race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity can be viewed as hate speech. Some examples of some things that somebody could be charged with. So if somebody's arrested for hate speech, what would their criminal charges be? So something that we might, if we arrested somebody, they could be charged with malicious communications, stalking, harassment, inciting racial hatred, and incitement to commit violence. And locally, how that translates in terms of crimes that we've seen locally, we've seen a real spike in the stalking and harassment types of crimes that are happening online. And they equate to just over a quarter of all our hate crimes in the last 12 months. Unfortunately, there's been a number of key events recently that have really impacted on the hate crime in Northamptonshire. COVID-19 has had a huge impact, not just locally but nationally. We've seen a 21% increase in Chinese, Japanese and South Asian people being targeted. And that's something that we've seen locally as well, unfortunately. Although our community is much smaller in Northampton of our Chinese, Japanese and South Asian, we have seen a spike in hate crime directed towards them, and it's that blame game that we've seen. The George Floyd killing as well, we saw unprecedented levels of online hate being reported locally. Lots and lots of offensive posts, lots of sharing of inappropriate material, and we've got lots of investigations that are still ongoing linked to people that are local that have shared that information and have posted some offensive things. And again, really, unfortunately, recently, the Wellingborough Horse Fair, you know, that's something that I'm looking into at the moment, but, you know, the Northamptonshire press release attracted so many posts that were borderline criminal and racist that we had to delete over 300 of them. So it shows the type of things that people feel prepared to do online that they probably wouldn't do if they were face to face. So there's lots of key things that are happening locally that are impacting on our hate crime levels, which are currently at unprecedented levels. So what is the impact of hate speech on our communities and our individuals? And there's three things that I really wanted to highlight today that I think are really important that we bear in mind. Some of this might overlap with what Ben talks about, so I'll be really brief on it. But the sharing of hateful messages about individual groups and communities is very harmful. This online hate can cause people to feel isolated, depressed, and scared about what people are saying about them. Even more harm occurs when people agree or like and share posts. Secondly, this can result in gang-like behaviour towards others online and the creation of echo chambers where people share their ideas with no opposition or moderation. And that's quite concerning when we talk about hate crime, because people who are in platforms and online forums with like-minded individuals sharing offensive and hateful content are not challenged. There's no pushback, nobody's questioning what they're saying, and what that does is perpetuate for them that what they're saying and what they believe is right and true when it isn't. And thirdly, evidence indicates that the sharing of hateful attitudes online can motivate people to commit harmful acts in real life, such as physical assaults, verbal abuse, damage to property, and even shootings and bombings. And I think that's something that Ben will go over again, but it's that translation from an online platform into a physical crime. So how do Northamptonshire Police deal with sort of hate that's happening and perpetrated online? And there are some investigative difficulties that we do have with it. So not to get into too technical a detail, but where a post originates from is the location that the crime took place in. So if somebody in Manchester creates a nasty post and posts it online and I see it and I think it's offensive and I report it, it's actually the police in Manchester because that's where the post originated from, that have the duty to investigate that crime. So when we're getting lots of reports into Northamptonshire Police about posts that are coming from not just the UK, but all around the world, it's really difficult for us at times to try and pinpoint that. But what I can assure you is that even if a post doesn't breach the threshold of a criminal act, we will still record and investigate, and we will at least record a hate incident and investigate those. Okay. So when a hate speech doesn't always constitute in a criminal record, it still can have a massive impact on individuals who are posting, and rightly so. We've recently, with the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the posts that people were sharing within our county, we've had a lot of individuals who have been reported by their workplaces who may not have breached that criminal threshold, but their conduct has resulted in them losing their job, losing friends, and being banned from online. So there are, sorry, that's too small to read, I can send that out separately, but it's just some of the consequences that we're seeing for people going forward. So with our communities at the moment, our presence is more and more online. I think that community groups are more often than not online these days rather than physical, and with the things like COVID, that can always be a great thing. You know, we can still support each other and we can still, you know, communicate with each other, but it also brings its difficulties and challenges, and that's something that myself and people who I work with have been looking at for some time. And we're concerned that communities that are operating solely online, people are posting and sharing and saying things that they would not normally say if they were face to face. There's a couple of things that I want everybody in this meeting to take away. There's a list that I've just put on the screen. I'm not going to go over and over it, but I just really want you to take some of those points away. I'm sure none of you would post anything inappropriate, but I do want people to be a bit conscious of what it is they're posting and sharing online. And also, as an organisation, the police are putting together a tasking group. We recognise that there isn't any kind of official guidance or document for community groups on how to govern these groups and how to challenge inappropriate behaviour and speech. So I'm going to be putting together a tasking group, and I'm going to be asking for community members to join me in that, and to put together a piece of guidance that can be shared. So I'll put my details on the screen in a moment so that we can come together and actually create something that people can refer back to. So going forward, what I want people to remember and to share is that we want to know about reports, whether it is a post that you've seen and you don't know who's posted it. If it's offensive, I want to know about it, and you can do that online. You can call it on 101, you can report via a third party, so you can go to Emric or another third party, but for us it helps to build that picture, and it helps us to put pieces of a puzzle together, particularly around perpetrators of hate crime, because that one post is often not just on its own. There's obviously a backstory to that. So please do report it, and I've put on the screen ways in which you can report. So if you are interested in being part of that tasking group that's going to help create that document for people, or if you've got any questions around hate crime or anything that I've mentioned today, my details are on the screen, so do take a note of it, and please do contact me. But I think I've got my 12 minutes up now.
And that was so well done. So thank you so much, Yemi, for your presentation. I think particularly the encouragement to report, is a message that we're hopefully all taking on board. And also the other thing that I can do, again, if you send me your presentation, that I can send out to everyone who attended, I'll also send out some training materials that NREC has about reporting it to social media providers and how you actually report Facebook posts to Facebook, Twitter posts to Twitter, YouTube posts to YouTube, and Instagram posts to Instagram. So thank you again, and we'll move sharply on. If you could unshare your screen, Yemi. And I now have the pleasure of introducing Ben Smith. Ben Smith works for Leicester City Council, but he has a brief where he's working across Leicestershire and has a strategic role working with colleagues in the Home Office as well. So with no further ado, Ben.
I'm so sorry to disturb, Chair. Is there a possibility to ask a question quickly to Yemi before we go on to Ben, or are we leaving it till as last?
So we're doing question and answers at the end of the two presentations. So
okay, thank you.
Present first, and then there will be ample opportunity for people to ask lots of questions. So again, Ben, do you want to take it over?
Great, thanks then, Joan, and thanks Yemi as well. It's really good to hear the kind of the language that you're speaking, because it resonates exactly what we're doing in Leicester as well. So you could have quite easily have been the Leicestershire hate crime officer with what you've just said, which is great. It's a nice connection. I mean, firstly, thanks for inviting me along this evening. It's nice to virtually travel down the M1 to from Leicester to Northamptonshire. So it's nice to be invited along. I've sort of split my presentation or discussion really and talking points broadly into kind of six different aspects. So I'll just kind of run through those. To start off with, I mean, I just wanted to kind of just very briefly, if it's okay, just to explain my role in more detail as well. So my job title, as has been mentioned, I'm based within Leicester City Council, based within the community safety team within the City Council. I've been within the role now for 3 years, took up post in August 2017. And at the time, it was a brand new role based within Leicester City Council. During 2017, it was a brand new role created across the country as well. So it's an externally funded role. It's funded by the Home Office, and specifically a relatively small Home Office team called the Counter-Extremism Unit. So my sort of primary role for being in the role is to deliver the government's counter-extremism strategy. And there's different elements of that, which I will just kind of briefly go through. But what's really important to kind of highlight, and it's part of conversations that I've had with community groups, throughout the time I've been working in Leicester, is the difficulty really around the E word and extremism, because there's the natural, and I totally understand why, but there's the natural assumption that whenever that word is mentioned, especially in an officer capacity or strategy, the first thought really is around prevent. That's kind of the most public facing side really of extremism. I think from my work and from my perspective in the role, it's always really important to highlight the difference and highlight the fact that I'm not actually a prevent officer. My role is distinct from that. So within looking at delivering the counter-extremism strategy, my role is really looking at the wider social harms of extremism, which can take many forms. Whereas prevent is is looking at the threat and risk of radicalisation moving into terrorism. So that's kind of their area of work. Within my sort of wider harms of extremism work, it does then encapsulate the threat and risk of hatred, and to consider the effect that has on communities. What's really useful with the way the national structure is set up is that I'm based in Leicester. My priority focus is to deliver within Leicester City, but there's scope for my role to cross into Leicestershire County. So I work with Leicestershire County's community safety team, as well as some of the smaller district community safety teams as well. But importantly, I'm part of a national network. So there's approximately at the moment, there's about 35 or 36 other community coordinators across the country, which over the past 3 years has just proven to be such a powerful network, really. It's quite amazing to be able to pick up the phone to Bristol and talk about maybe a community issue that's currently resonating in Leicester, and then find out what's going on, down in Bristol, and seeing how that's manifesting itself, and seeing how certain issues might be impactful there. So that's really useful, and it's really kind of, I think, hopefully helped our sort of collective understanding of groups or individuals that perpetuate hate, and have an online presence as well, because we can try and look at how those online figures are resonating in our respective areas or not as well. So that's just kind of a quick overview. Just very briefly, I won't dwell on it, but in terms of the counter-extremism strategy itself, it's not all that well known, to be fair. It's a strategy that's existed nationally. It was signed off by government in October 2015, so it's been around now for a good little while. There's 4 main pillars, as it were, to that strategy. So the first one is around countering extremist ideology. So that's looking at maybe challenging extremist narratives, so whether that be extremist within their communities or online extremism. And that's can then be looking at maybe a targeted program of interventions, or whether that's funding that might go to community groups. The second element of the strategy is building partnerships with those opposed to extremism. So historically, that's the element of the strategy that's really taken up the most of my work, kind of building those local partnerships and building those local relationships, and then looking at supporting those groups. The third element is disrupting extremists. So whether that be kind of looking at online platforms or actual kind of physical, street-based protest, where the far right, for example, might be turning up, and pre-planning, what activities might go into those types of events. And then the fourth element was building more cohesive communities. That element of the strategy has eventually come out, and there was a separate government strategy set up called the Integrated Communities Strategy, which in turn has gone on to look at community cohesion. The role I'm in definitely has to have a mindset of understanding cohesion and understanding what community dynamics are in the local area. So that's still very much something that I'm mindful of within the local role. The main objectives of my role within that, so like I said, I deliver against the building partnerships with those opposed to extremism, and my main 3 criteria really are building an understanding of what the drivers and the prevalence of extremism is in my respective local area, identifying local partners, which has proven to be a really valuable part of the role, which I'll go into briefly. And then finally supporting local partners as well, which is then allowing those groups to access this direct Home Office support, for example, or other funding opportunities that might be available. So over the past 3 years that I've been in the role, we've seen some really powerful, really amazing community counter-extremism work. I think a lot of work that's taken place you wouldn't even really think of being counter-extremism. Counter-extremism is quite an intimidating phrase, to be honest. But I think some of the community-led initiatives that we've had, you'd almost struggle to say, well, that's surely not countering extremism. I'll go into some of those. But what we've seen over the past couple of months, and kind of really linking into what Yemi was saying, is just the massive challenge really in community dynamics, misinformation that's all stemmed from the COVID pandemic. And I'll go into some of the local trends that we've seen in regards reported hate crime as well, which is really troubling. And obviously Leicester was sadly, regrettably, I suppose, in the forefront of a lot of the national COVID country, so still unable to go into one another's houses or even gardens. Those kind of restrictions still play out. But what we've seen during COVID, from a practitioner point of view, has been really quite fascinating, because it's sad and it's horrible. What I will put a caveat up, I will be describing things, narratives that some people might find upsetting as well. So I apologise if if some of the themes that we discuss or talk about are upsetting, because they're not pleasant. How extremist groups exploiting some of these issues is really difficult. But we've seen different phases of COVID in terms of the hate crime that's been reported, for example. So probably much like Northamptonshire Police will have seen, when there was the initial start of the pandemic, kind of March going into early April, definitely saw considerable rises in Southeast Asian communities reporting hate crime, Chinese businesses, for example, reporting hate crime. But then on the flip side of that, other Southeast Asian communities who were being misidentified as Chinese also then being targeted for hate crime as well. So I know, for example, from liaising with the University of Leicester, there were groups of Malaysian students or other Southeast Asian students that were also targeted in certain areas and blamed for misblamed for the spread and bringing coronavirus from China. So I think that was the most noticeable kind of reporting side of hate crime that we saw. And then moving kind of through maybe into May and June, we saw then the deeply troubling sort of misidentification and real stereotyping very negatively of the local Muslim community, for example. That kind of fell into the timeline of Ramadan leading up to Eid as well. And again, really troubling seeing how that community was being labelled for completely fictional wrong things in the city. But the rising tensions that then created as well, and just maybe historic community tensions that might have existed were then exacerbated by COVID and the finger pointing across different areas of the city. So whether they be sort of faith or geographic based tensions, that's been something quite challenging to manage. And it's definitely challenged cohesion within the city as well. I think on the flip side of that, we have seen some really positive elements, which I'll go into towards the end. So it's not all negative, thankfully. We have seen some really great local activism to kind of counter some of the negative messaging. Moving then probably from May into June, with the rise of Black Lives Matter as a movement becoming much more prominent, that then directly led to more Black members of the Leicester community being targeted for hate crime. Again, based on sort of some of the trends that Yemi was showing earlier on in terms of some of the historic national stuff, you can do almost a Leicester version of that, where there's different trends within that based on certain movements or certain things happening in the city or nationally. We're still kind of through Leicestershire Police, I think, going through some of the sort of the deeper analysis of some of the trends on some of these things. But with Black Lives Matter, I think it's quite interesting to see not only, sadly, local Black community members reporting hate crime and sadly, being victims of hate crime, but we're also seeing an increase where for example, non-Black community members are reporting hate crime that they're witnessing. So that's been quite an interesting trend as well, possibly more kind of bystander reporting. But again, there's a bit more work that needs to be done, I think, on some of those things. But positive in the sense that other community members are witnessing things and they are wanting to report on behalf of someone else, but sad nonetheless that clearly hate crime and hate incidents are occurring in the first instance. From an extremism point of view, coming out of the initial kind of couple of weekends of Black Lives Matter protests that took place across the country nationally, we've then seen the counter protests from the far right, the kind of increased White Lives Matter, All Lives Matter movement as well, which is again really challenging, and seeing how misinformation that's been spread online has somehow encouraged different community members to think certain hashtags are okay without realizing maybe the context or some of the background to where, for example, the White Lives Matter actually originated from in terms of some of the far right history to that. So that's problematic. It remains problematic. We're very alert locally to activization of far right groups and street protests. We haven't yet seen any major street-based activity in Leicester, but again, linking into the National Community Coordinator Network, we definitely have. So I hope Nottingham won't mind me talking about it. But for example, I think it was Saturday the 22nd of August, a couple of weeks back now, but there was quite a significant far right protest that took place right in the middle of Nottingham city centre. That was originally a genuinely set up veterans event that was, wanted to highlight certain injustices maybe within that community group. But sadly, the whole event was hijacked and taken over by different far-right groups, and then sadly with that came a whole host of other narratives that actually became really the focal point of the event. And I think approximately 700 people turned up to that event in Nottingham City Centre. So, you know, some of these events can become quite large and challenging. On the back of that, and I think probably what we've seen more of during July, August, and we're still seeing now, but what we're kind of regarding is the anti-asylum seeker narratives and the anti-asylum seeker activity as well. So really disheartening to see, but the resurgence in activity by far-right groups such as Britain First and groups of that kind, that I think at the moment feel quite emboldened but by certain narratives that they're continually putting out around because of the COVID situation, the temporary accommodation of, for example, asylum seekers in hotels. So you might be aware of some national stories. There was a story about the Bromsgrove Hotel a couple of weeks ago where Britain First were very active. There's been subsequent activity in Coventry and other areas as well. So that's something we're really sort of proactively looking at the moment, and looking at kind of the migration sort of leads within our respective areas, and looking at how we can kind of proactively plan for that type of activity, but equally looking at kind of the safeguarding of some of those asylum seeker and refugee communities as well, because they can, you know, naturally very vulnerable if people just from far right group burst into a hotel wanting to agitate and intimidate people, you know, deeply damaging. So that's some of the more recent narratives that we've seen. I wanted to also just to mention, during the past couple of months, there has been some really interesting, as you would expect, I suppose, some really interesting insight and analysis of some of the national trends and the global trends as well. So I'm happy to share links afterwards that maybe Anjona could maybe share. But there were just a couple of reports that I just wanted to briefly mention that you might want to just check out afterwards. Within our role as community coordinators, even though obviously based within our local authorities, working in our local authorities on behalf of the Home Office, about 2.5 years ago, the government set up the Independent Commission for Countering Extremism. So the National Commissioner for Countering Extremism is a lady called Sarah Khan, and they over the past year or so really started to publish some really interesting insight and kind of collation of case studies of extremists and hateful narratives. But back in July, on the 9th of July, they actually released a really interesting paper that I would recommend reading, looking at how extremists and extremist groups were exploiting the COVID pandemic. Even, you know, a couple of months, we've moved a couple of months on from there, but I would recommend going back to that. It's a really insightful, really useful report to look at. There's been similar reports that I'd recommend. So there's the Independent Anti-Muslim Hatred Working Group. They published a report quite early on in the COVID pandemic, looking at the specific issue of Islamophobia and how Muslim communities were being unfairly targeted and blamed for the spread of COVID as well. So their paper collated a whole raft of international as well as national examples of anti-Muslim hatred and how, you know, which groups and which personalities were looking to perpetuate issues and problems. So that's, again, I'd recommend looking at reports such as that. Just in terms of some of the local hate crime trends that we've seen, again, these are just approximate figures that I've written down from memory, having met with Leicestershire Police. But our June reported hate crime year on year, if you're comparing 2019 to June 2020, we've seen an approximate 80% increase June on June this year, which is obviously really quite worrying. During July, it's an approximate 60% increase, July last year versus July this year. And then during August, we've seen, I've got to see the exact figures, but it's approximate increase of about 90% year on year. So that's what, you know, clearly worrying. It's not going in the right direction. I think we're still trying to determine why some of those things have happened. We have to factor in the Leicester local lockdown and maybe when some of the restrictions were lifted and where and when people were then in sort of greater contact with one another, and whether that's led to sort of spikes. Certainly the initial findings would indicate that a decent proportion of those increases are related to neighbourhood disputes, so sort of antisocial behaviour that really escalates and ends up in kind of racially motivated crime. We've also seen road rage incidents increase, but then also sadly increase with a racially motivated theme to it as well. And I think probably less in terms of numbers, but massively increased in terms of percentage. We've also seen an increase in hate crime perpetuated against members of the community with disabilities as well. So maybe not huge numbers, like I said, in terms of the total number, but percentage-wise, a really big increase. I think what we're trying to look at the moment is maybe some work with public transport, because it would appear that some of those cases are occurring on public transport, and in which case there maybe needs to be some greater safeguards for people with disability to use public transport. That's something that needs to be looked at in further detail at the moment, but I hope we'll have some local projects that can run moving forward with that. What you probably will also be aware of during COVID and the pandemic, and again we've seen more of that in recent weeks, it seems to be ever increasing, but there is a link to extremism and hate crime, but is the greater sense and greater utilisation of conspiracy theories in regards to COVID as well. So whether that's sort of the original sort of early stage 5G conspiracy theories that were doing the rounds, that seems to have now morphed and it's got quite confused, and there's other groups from the far right that are now quite happily exploiting some of those COVID hoax themes and conspiracy theories. So as a national network, that's currently something that we're very mindful of, looking at which groups and which far right activists are trying to exploit conspiracy theories that might already be present, and again kind of racial stereotyping, cultural stereotyping that might be part of that as well. I've referenced kind of some of the growing street-based protests. So for example, the Nottingham example. I've mentioned Britain First and how some of those historic groups have sadly come to the fore again, and they feel somewhat emboldened at the moment on the back of COVID, and they're quite willing to really inflame some of the the tensions. There are also newer groups that have come to the fore as well. I won't dwell on them too much, but one group that people might just want to be aware of, you might well be already aware of them, but there's a group called Patriotic Alternative, and they ran a campaign a month or two ago called Indigenous Peoples Day 2020, but that was very much aimed at kind of being a negative counter again to Black Lives Matter and the movement, and they were really pushing the hashtag of White Lives Matter. But again, that's a group that I think people need to be quite mindful of at the moment. They're very much into publicity stunts, creating material that has an online presence and can then be used and shared more widely. They're not your kind of more typical, maybe English Defence League type street-based protests that want a real kind of, aggressive presence. But again, they're a group that I think people, just need to be aware of in their local areas. Another aspect of the COVID lockdown that we've been very mindful of, possibly more so actually in Prevent than some of my work, and we're seeing it now with schools back opening, but it's the amount of time that obviously young people have been at home, have been maybe online for extended periods of time, maybe without parental guidance in some cases. And then there's just concerns about what young people might have been accessing online in terms of extremist material, what online platforms they might have been using as well as part of that. It's quite unbelievable. We've even seen news in the past week where, really extreme right-wing terrorist groups have been picked up on. There's trials that are running, and in a lot of these cases, we've got sort of 13 and 14-year-old children that have been perpetuating the online hate, and they very quickly, at a very young age, really brainwashed themselves into some really extreme right-wing material. Not saying that's necessarily happened in Leicester, but certainly on a national level. And just briefly again to maybe kind of link in with what Yemi was saying earlier, just an interesting point really about online platforms, because I think what we've seen over the past year, even maybe prior to the COVID pandemic, was how the mainstream social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, were starting to tighten up some of their restrictions, and I think what we've seen over the past 6 months is that some of the key players in terms of far right have been kind of booted off some of those platforms, which I think is really good. It's good in terms of the mainstream, definitely has a positive effect. People, such as, for example, let's say Katie Hopkins, who had a very, very large kind of Twitter profile, that has now been removed. I think the flip side is there's a whole load of other much more niche social media platforms that they've just naturally kind of migrated onto. And to link back to Yemi's point about echo chambers, I mean, I think that's problematic at the moment, because we've got certain online platforms now that if you go into those, all you're faced with is all the far right activists. It's just one directional messaging. And I think if a young person, for example, maybe let's just say a young vulnerable person goes into that, it's a very damaging environment to be in. I did a quick search as well of just some of the more niche and kind of obscure online platforms, and it was quite interesting because from a practitioner point of view, that's also proving to be really challenging. When it was Facebook, Twitter, those kinds of platforms, with permission, it was maybe a bit easier as a practitioner to go on and kind of see what negative narratives were doing the rounds and then try to understand how that might affect local communities. But now we've got such a vast range of different social media platforms. As a practitioner, I don't feel like there's enough time to go on all of these social media platforms. And when I did a quick search earlier on of popular social media platforms, it came up with a list of 77 different online social media platforms, which just shows the breadth. And when you're thinking something like TikTok, which is now just so widely used by young people, that was number 57 on the list. So it's quite incredible, really, the breadth and the choice that people now have. But it does make it difficult from a practitioner point of view to kind of keep a handle on what's being said online. Still though, I mean, I was looking at some research that was published, and again, another organisation I'd recommend people look into if you're not already aware. But there's an organisation called the Institute of Strategic Dialogue. They published some fantastic analysis generally about hate and extremism, but they put out some information just yesterday looking at hate crimes, international as well as UK based. But they did some analysis into the Kenosha shooting linked to Black Lives Matter and how that's been interpreted. Sadly, some of the really hateful, negative narratives that have been discussed online. But in their research, they were still saying those hateful narratives. I think the figure I've got here is that they do really in-depth research, but 85% of the hateful narratives that they picked up on were still on the platforms of Twitter and Facebook. That's where they were seeing them. So even with this list of 77 other social media platforms, 85% of the hate they saw was actually still on the mainstream. So there's no getting away from the fact that it is there. And the narratives as well, I think, seem to be changing so rapidly at the moment, whether it be themes that are coming out of the US election or Black Lives Matter, whatever it may be. And again, as a practitioner, it feels like every week there's something new to be mindful of and to think about how that might impact local communities. So that's an ongoing challenge. I've gone through kind of a whole load of negative things there, but I did want to make sure that I end on a positive, and I think my time's probably up really soon. But just very briefly, what we have seen on the other side of the COVID pandemic in Leicester is some real true positivity. So what we saw, for example, back in July, I think it was, into early August, we saw a real determined Leicester community togetherness, where key organisations, both kind of third sector as well as, for example, Leicester City Football Club and the University of Leicester, kind of joined together and really push a positive hashtag. So the hashtag Together in Hope and the hashtag We Are Leicester, there was some really focused, there was a week of sort of activities and PR and public, really positive communications that were delivered through a particular week in the summer. And that, to a degree, I think really helped create a bit more positivity in the city, allowed some really incredibly positive stories to come out from what communities had been delivering. But it was just nice to see that flip side as well. I won't go on too much longer because I've probably gone on just to give you a bit of a picture. I hope, Angela, that's just a useful kind of insight into some of the narratives, but I'll leave it there and then we can go into questions, I suppose.
I think, Ben, this is just an immense area of work for everyone, and it's been really great to get the perspective from Leicester and some of your insight in terms of being a practitioner and the trends that you have seen. Certainly there's been, I feel that there's some resonance locally in Northamptonshire, with particularly some of the themes that have come out in under the COVID period, like things like the neighbour disputes, etc. With people just spending a lot more time at home and finding it more difficult to avoid people that they don't they have confrontational relationships with, and avoid people who've been quite racist to them, to be quite blunt about this. So again, thank you so much for doing that. Again, thank you, Yemi, for your presentation as well. If we can open this up now for questions and answers. I know we've got a question from Mona. So Mona, did you want to kind of let us know what your question was?
Could I just come in first, please, Angela? Can we record this session?
We are recording the session.
Oh, well, I mean, I was trying to record it, but it won't let me unless the host tells me I can do it. All right.
Okay, so going back to Mona, Mona, could you?
Thank you, Anjana, and thank you, Ben, for the wonderful background and sort of the local history and the kind of work that you do with your police force and your colleagues really in Leicester. So your question basically to you is, because obviously I'm not from Leicester, having to hear the couple of things that you've raised. By the way, everybody excuse the background noise, my children are still up. You probably can hear them on their gadgets. So apologies for that. So yeah, very quickly. So Ben, I just wanted to ask, how are you and your force communicating and in terms of the force-wise and in tackling these issues that some of them mentioned, that is definitely raising up that is definitely raising up in within your area, because it's I just for a minute whilst listening to all of these concerns, sorry, excuse me again, while all listening to all these concerns, where there's maybe some good bits out of there, it really like raised my heart, because obviously locally I've gone through from some nasty stuff here, which wasn't really pleasant. But what I want to hear is perhaps what kind of work are you guys doing collaboratively over in Leicester, and as well as how is the community involved in terms of what you're doing over there. Can I raise my question to Yemi as well? I've got to leave soon. Or shall I hear this out?
Yeah, so collaboratively in Northampton, particularly around COVID, do you mean around COVID and how we responded as a police force? Okay, I'll talk about COVID. I think that's what she meant. Yeah, so a community tactical group was put together with the police, the council, the borough councils and Northampton County Council, and a lot of community groups were part of that as well. And actually we looked at loads of different things. So we looked at material. Actually, is the material that we're putting out accessible to everybody? Is it in every language? Is it accessible to our Romanian community, for instance? So we had that translated into 10 different languages, so that we know that our communities can actually follow the COVID guidance and are not being unfairly penalised or fixed penalty notices when they don't actually understand what's going out. So it was things like that. It was working with hard to reach communities, maybe people who have disabilities who weren't able to go out and get their shopping, for instance. So those groups pulled together, and there was a lot of work that took place sort of underneath the surface that maybe the community don't necessarily know about, but yeah, lots was going on there.
I don't know whether we've had something put into the chat from Hillary, and she's raised the issue that part of the antagonism in the community, both in Leicester and in Northampton, related to working environments and working people in working environments. In Leicester, the accusation that there was increased transmission in the clothing factories, and in Northamptonshire, similarly, the cluster in Greencourt. Also a lot of the blame then about those working people. And I just wanted, Ben, Yemi, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, do you want me to go first, Ben? You're still muted. Yeah, that's a really good question, Anjona. And actually, I work with Isla, who's the hate crime officer for Leicestershire as well. So we work really closely together, and we had a meeting and she discussed Leicester. So I'll let Ben talk about that. But from a Northampton perspective, I must admit I was absolutely petrified in terms of some of the messaging that came out from Greencourt around the staff and what that might mean in terms of potential hate crimes. And thankfully, we didn't really see anything substantial from a Northampton perspective in terms of blame. Having said that, the whole way through COVID, there have been trends where, so during Ramadan, for instance, or Eid, where false allegations perhaps were being put in around the Muslim community attending the mosque. You know, and that trying to stir in of racial tensions within our community. So we're really conscious of that and really aware of it. So we anticipate that happening. But like I say, with Greencourt, thankfully, we didn't see any kind of rise linked to that. I'm not sure about Ben.
Ben, did you want to comment about the situation in Leicester and the clothing industry, the sweatshops that were there, and the accusation that they were impacting on the COVID outbreak?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself for a moment there, but I can't. Yeah. I mean, it was so challenging thinking back to, again, April, sort of May time. Into the mix of the whole stress and uncertainty around the COVID pandemic, then was the added mix really of what was being discovered about, or what was being looked into in regards to the Leicester garment sector. I mean, there's still a lot of ongoing work there, so I can't talk too much about that, and it's a different sort of element of the council that's looking in that in more detail. But what we definitely did see was stigmatisation of communities, stigmatisation of some of the areas and localities where a lot of those factories were based as well. And again, this is just where the misinformation came in, and just really, sort of demonisation of communities. I think, sadly, there might be sort of medium to longer term impacts of some of that as well. How the finger, or the virtual finger, has been pointed at certain neighbourhoods in Leicester that has factories. So that's it's very, very challenging, and undoubtedly, a partial rise of hate crime because of that as well.
So I've got a couple more hands up. So I'm going to bring in Edward Amissa, who's indicated. Edward, do you want to kind of let us know your story?
Very detailed information passed on, but two questions I've got, one for Yemi and one for Ben. Yemi, we talk about Northampton as a Northampton or Northamptonshire, because I'm joining from Kettering, so I'll be happy to know the demographics on the the statistics that you gave, the figures that you gave, as per region, and then also the target group, as in what age is committing these crimes. So when we targeting our response or solutions, we can target it effectively. And that is a second question to Ben as well. Are you having the same age classification group for these crimes?
Thank you for the question. I'm just getting the figures around the age, because I have actually got a profile for our offenders. I had our team have a look at that before today, but I didn't have time to talk about it. when I talk about figures, I'm talking about our county, I'm talking about Northamptonshire. If we were to break that down geographically, Northampton is the highest area. Wellingborough and Kettering are also elevated, but I haven't got specifics around what at the moment, but I can get that information and I can get that disseminated out to you. Let me just get the profile for our is it our offenders that you're interested in? Who are our offenders of hate crime?
He's muted. Oh,
Now, sorry, I'm back on there. Yes, it's the figures on the crime. Say who is committing or who are the group, the age classification.
Yeah, so offenders, so the statistics, if we look at the last year, January to August, so our offenders who are most likely to cause hate crimes are aged 35 to 44 years. They account for just over, nearly 24% of crime. 5.5% of offenders, interestingly, are actually under 13 years old. And the ethnicity breakdown, the most prevalent group of offender is white European, and that is 76.2% of our offenders.
okay. And I've also had earlier on Simon Dave, he had his hand up. Simon, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, please, if you don't mind. I've been interested and involved in hate crime for a good few years now, and I see a few familiar faces amongst all of the participants. I was involved in setting up a couple of hate crime third-party reporting centres across Northamptonshire and Bedfordshire about five, 6 years ago. I was just wondering, this is for Yemi really, I was just wondering in relation to the policing priorities, does hate crime feature in the policing priorities at the moment? Because I know everybody's up against the cosh with regards to resources and what they can do. And if it's not within the policing priorities, then generally it's going to get lost in the mix.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Perhaps we can exchange details. I think you're obviously going to have a lot of knowledge that I might want to ask you about outside of the forum. Yeah, in terms of policing priorities, hate crime is in the Police and Crime Commissioner's plan for the year, so it is there. We've also just rewritten and will be relaunching the hate crime strategy, which tackling hate crime strategy, which was written in partnership with lots of our council partners. So it's a partnership document. It was put together not just by the police but by everybody, and we went out to consultation on that. So that's just been signed off by the board. So that's a piece of information that that will be shared shortly. But yeah, it's on the Police and Crime Commissioner's priority plan for the year.
Is that a refreshed document? Because that was something that was done again probably 4 or 5 years ago.
The strategy, yes, we've just written it. So
okay.
Paul from Emric was involved in the group, and it's a strategy document, and there's going to be there is an associated action plan, but it was put together by partners, the council and other statutory organisations, but it's new and it hasn't been seen by the public yet. So
I think that's the way to go forward. For me, it's always been partnership working. It's always been working alongside statutory voluntary agencies that can tackle all sorts of hate crime. I mean, the type of hate crime that is in abundance actually cuts across so many different strands that it's impossible for just one agency to tackle it in itself. So to be effective, we need to all pull together. I don't know, just as a matter of personal interest, because I haven't been involved with third-party reporting centres for a few years now. How are they going? Are there any improved increased number of reporting or not?
No, not as well as I'd like, Simon, to be honest. It's not something that has been working very well recently, and it's part of our strategy actually to look at how we can make that work and how we can you know, develop that and work as partnerships. So if I would like to rack your brains on that, if I could, outside of this.
Yeah, no problems.
Thank you.
So we've got another question from Chat Johnston. So let's see. Just unmute you. There you go. Chat, go and speak.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. So this is a question for both Ben and Yemi. And Yemi, I'd like to just recognise your point that one public racist utterance will often reflect many others which aren't so obvious. There has been, from my perspective, a failure of visible action on Cabinet and MPs who have been quite visibly racist. Now, we've seen a number of things from the hostile environment, jokes about the Chinese, through to Boris supporting very much the Trumpian perspective that COVID is a Chinese virus, and MPs who have blamed BAME members for not social distancing. We've seen a lot of overt racism from that, and what I haven't heard here is recognition that the increase in racism generally has to be partly attributed to this permissive atmosphere created by the government in power. So my question is, what is the police role in addressing racism from those in power, and how much are they compromised?
Hi, Chet. Ben. Do you want to come in? You've just unmuted yourself.
Yeah, no, happy to. I mean, it's a really good question. I think sometimes in the community coordinator network, we feel like, you know, we're here to serve a purpose. We're here to deliver a strategy, and there's certainly certain instances over the past year, 2 years, where, you know, sadly, things have been said by ministers that really, you know, are very difficult and really make for, you know, tension and resentment from, you know, various communities. So from my perspective, there is that, and there has been that connection between maybe what's been said nationally or internationally, and then how certain communities, you know, feel quite targeted because of that, and that's a real challenge. Just on that point, again, maybe it's something I could circulate outside of this, but we had some community-led research undertaken back in July, independently from any sort of statutory agency, but that was looking at, it was requesting more press accountability, but it was looking at what narratives were going out through the press in regards to COVID, and how communities, again, were being, you know, misrepresented. But as a piece of research, that's really interesting, because it does take in certain national statements by, you know, certain members of the government maybe, and really looks at how the communities have interpreted some of those messages, and it's really challenging. It's very difficult as a practitioner as well, where you're trying to build community trust and potentially draw down, you know, funding from the Home Office, for example. Whereas on the flip side, I absolutely understand why certain communities would absolutely not want to go anywhere near the Home Office based on maybe previous experience. So it's organisational commentary as much as maybe, you know, figurehead in terms of politicians, but it can be challenging, for sure.
Yemi, did you want to kind of contribute to this?
Yeah, I do actually, and I think it's a really good question. I'm just trying to find another graph, sorry, that actually shows a spike in hate crime that we had following Boris Johnson's election, and it was huge and it was significant, and we recognised the reasons behind that, and it is a really difficult one as the police force, because we do recognise that, but we also have to make sure that we're not political in how we speak and how we come across. So yes, when I deliver training to police officers, for instance, one of the graphs that I show is that link to political speech, You know, when, I don't know if you saw it, but the time in Parliament when they were talking about traitors and they were talking about, the language was really, really, it was crossing a line essentially, and the impact on the hate crime figures afterwards, you know, was significant. So we know that and we recognise that. And how we police that, you know, I'm open to suggestion. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult subject, but I think ultimately our leaders need to recognise the impact that their speech and how they conduct themselves in Parliament and places like that has an impact on their communities and our country.
I just want to at this stage bring in Paul Cross, who's the NREC director on the Hate Crime Delivery Group, just to make a comment about this. Chet, I know you want to come back. I'll bring you in afterwards. Okay, fine. So Paul.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question by Chet, because as Yemi's indicated, the evidence is clear that a lot of hate crime is driven by political leaders, not only in the UK but also abroad, and it is very challenging for public sector organisations, and particularly the police, who have to operate in this highly politicised environment, and they themselves try to, in inverted commas, avoid politics. But it must be said, I was very impressed with Northamptonshire Police recently over the issue of the Traveller horse fair, where it was quite clear and quite apparent that political leaders of local councils and parish councils were involved in stirring up precisely the kinds of problems which resulted in this moral panic and hostility and hate incidents against travellers, which Yemi referred to as well earlier. Northamptonshire Police, I think, were very clear that they were having no truck with this. And I know, and it's very difficult for the police to go public, but I know in private, some very, very strong words were said by police officers to political leaders about their role in this. This also then raises a question: if public bodies cannot themselves, publicly at least, stand up against this kind of politically motivated hate by politicians, which of course is quite attractive. I mean, there's no doubt that there's votes in hate, there's votes in stirring up prejudice, and there are votes in bigotry, unfortunately, in the current climate. But that then requires us, members of the public, to have the courage ourselves to stand up. And that, I can tell you, on social media, standing up against hate and actually challenging people is not easy. I couldn't sleep for days because I was on social media challenging the hate and the bigotry directed at the traveller community. But I was virtually a lone voice on the social media sites that I was following. There were some notable exceptions. Some people, there were other people as well. But against the tide of hate and bigotry that was displayed, a few lone voices, you felt very lonely. And it needs more people, ordinary people, ourselves, to go public on these issues, and indeed to say when the police, for example, do stand up to it, that they themselves have been very brave to do that, and we applaud it.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. Chet's indicated he doesn't want to come back, so I'm just bringing in, if I can unmute him, Rashmi Shah. Maybe he can unmute himself. Not having any luck unmuting him. Rashmi, can you try and unmute yourself?
I don't think he's done so, have you?
I'm trying to do that, but it's not happening.
Yeah, Rashmi's lowered his hand, Angela, and also is not unmuted, so I assume he doesn't want to speak anymore.
Okay, so any other questions? I'm just going to look back in the chat.
Hello, Angela.
Well, wonderful, thank you. Rashmi, please have your question, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to find out how Northamptonshire are linked with the oversight of the COVID committee with the NCC, and what there is a actual representation from the BAME on it, and to this kind of views are exchanged, because as NCC have got the COVID oversight committee.
I guess this is a question for Yemi.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. I heard NCC and COVID oversight, but could you just clarify that for me, Rashmi?
Yeah, I just wanted to find out that how do you make sure that there is a BAME representation there, and you take all the information in relate to hate, and they really, because I understand that the OVID committee, that's mainly white male orientated, and I don't know what police links are with it and what information you're taking, so that they taking BAME seriously, and whether there's ways of making specific, resources available in terms of all the how you carry out to find out the impact of the COVID within the BAME in Northamptonshire.
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. I don't know the demographic of the makeup in the NCC in terms of BAME individuals. You're probably right. It probably is primarily white males, but I can't confirm that. What I can say is that I was feeding a lot of hate crime data into them around who our victims were during COVID. Not that it's over, what their ethnicity is, any kind of crimes that I felt were targeting specific communities, so that actually their response was proportionate. But actually, let me go back to that group and ask that question, because I think they're going to be the best people to answer that answer about the proportionality and making sure that everything in relation to the BAME community is being looked at. So is that all right if I go away and ask that question?
Yes, I also want to ask, does police not have any representation on that, as police commissioner within the, Northamptonshire on that, oversight committee? Because I would look at, if there is, then this, the BAME be, one way or another expressed, or what, I don't know.
Yeah, we do have representation from the police. So Chief Inspector Pete Basham, who works as the Commander for Communities, sits on that. So I would feed my information to him, and he would give us information back, and the community engagement officers. So it would work that way. So he was the link into the police from that perspective.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got a couple of more questions in the chat, Yemi.
Yeah.
Tony Malpass, hi Tony, has raised the Hate Crime Awareness Week activity and the fact that you're coordinating a number of activities around that. I know the Borough Council is meeting tomorrow, Northampton Borough Council is meeting tomorrow to see what activities they're doing, and also we've got an activity that we're doing in relation to that. So Yemi, do you want to just talk a bit about?
Yeah, that was one that I was going to raise actually later on. That's fine. So yes, so Hate Crime Awareness Week is the 10th to 17th of October this year. It's a difficult one because we're not able to do all the things that we would normally do and all the events that we would normally plan and host. So a lot of what we're doing is going to be virtual. So we are going to be doing a Facebook live session. I'm going to be asking one of our senior officers to get involved in that. So if anybody like this, you know, if you've got any questions about hate crime, you want the police to answer them, myself and a senior officer will be on that. I'll have to confirm which day that's going to be. It's obviously Black History Month as well. So we're working with the Northampton Black Police Association around a couple of pieces of work where police officers and staff are talking about their experiences of hate crime in a bid to kind of encourage the community to report and to advise the kind of support that we're going to be offering. I've linked in with Shirley, who's on the call here today, to promote around what Voice can do and offer for victims of hate crime. And there's going to be some other planning going on this week. So there are, like Anjona said, a couple of meetings that are going to be taking place this week. We usually do school events over in Corby as well with primary schools. So it's a competition, but I don't know if Tony's there. I don't know if she wants to talk about those. I don't know if they're going to be taking place this year. But really...
Sorry, do you want me to unmute Tony so she can do that?
She wants to.
Yeah, I think I'm here. So yeah, we annually we do quite a lot of activity, and that is centred around the school. We normally go in and deliver presentations, assemblies, workshops, and we involve our partners with that. So this year it will be slightly different. There are packs that have been put together that will be sent to the schools so that then the teachers can deliver them to the pupils themselves. We are having to do a lot of things virtually as well. We have got some other bits and pieces planned, but they're not as yet finalised, but we will send that through to Yemi very shortly just to confirm all of that. Thank you.
That's great, Tony. It's great to hear from you again. I'm just going to steal some stuff from Ben, just in terms of, Ben was saying to me one of the things that they're thinking about doing in Leicester is a hate crime pledge and encouraging people to take up a hate crime pledge. And I did a lot of, I looked around and a number of local areas have a pledge that they haven't. I'm just reflecting on some of those incredibly shocking statistics that both Ben and Yemi stated around the increase in hate crime that was happening over the COVID period, and also reflecting on what Paul had said about sometimes feeling that you're a lone voice when you're challenging racism. And I just wondered, I you know, kind of we will be doing as NREC stuff about around Hate Crime Week, but I think, you know, the more people we can get involved and the more people who are actually being loud about challenging hate and making a commitment to do that, I just think would be the better. Because ultimately, the police can't solve this on their own, and neither can local councils solve this on their own. And as Ben said, the good thing that came out of COVID is that there are loads of good people around who are really doing a huge amount to support local people in their local communities. And a lot of people actually want to just respect their neighbours and, you know, kind of treat people with respect and that kind of thing. And I just think that there's an opportunity there that we could do. So yeah, I'm just putting that out there. I've also got a question from Ron Mendel, and again I think it will be maybe to Ron Mendel and to from Helen Heng about increases in homophobia and transphobia over the past few months. And I guess both to Ben and to Yemi, has there been an increase? And if there has, do you have any views about why that increase happened, if it happened? So Yemi, do you want to start?
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm unmuted, aren't I? Good. I was just looking at my figures. Okay, so every year the Home Office reports to us and tells us a summary of all our different types of hate crime. We already know that, but they give us a summary. And this year the summary was interesting because hate crime linked to sexual orientation and disability have really significantly increased. And the reason behind that is partly because of raising awareness and asking people to report more. Remember, we talked about the reporting gap being around 50%. So when I see an increase in hate crime, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually quite a positive thing because it shows me that people are more confident in reporting. So yes, we have seen an increase in sexual orientation in particular and disability. Transgender, we haven't seen as a significant increase, which isn't indicative of victim experience. So we know there's a massive gap there. I think the gap for transgender hate crime is bigger than other hate crimes, I think, in terms of people reporting. And what was the other part of the question, sorry?
So was there, did you have any sense about why that was happening?
Why we've seen those increases? Again, I think it's partly because of things that have been happening nationally. I think that hate crime is reflective of what's going on in our communities and what's going on in the UK. But again, I think a lot of work has been done into asking people to report those types of hate crime. So we're urging people to report them and maybe having a more positive experience when they do report it.
Ben, did you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have figures to add, sadly, from the Leicester perspective. I mean, I'm quite reliant on that kind of data, obviously, from our equivalent in Leicestershire. And the monthly meetings that I've had with Isla, who's the Leicestershire Police Hate Crime Officer, haven't flagged up any specific recent trends around an increase in homophobia. I do recall her mentioning maybe 3 months back that there was a slight increase, from memory this is, a slight increase in reports of transphobic hate crime. So again, I think it was a relatively big percentage increase in terms of transphobic hate crime, but in terms of pure numbers, it was really, really quite small. Not taking away from the seriousness of that hate crime at all, but I think as a percentage of overall hate crime for Leicester and Leicestershire, it was still a very, very small percentage. But like I said, that was probably going back maybe 3 or 4 months, but nothing really raised a specific trend on that since.
So this just kind of illustrates the smoke and mirrors about the figures, just in terms of you never know whether there's a big increase because people have suddenly got more confidence, or you don't know whether there isn't an increase because actually people do not have the confidence to report. And particularly with homophobic and transphobic hate crime, the numbers generally tend to be a lot smaller. So, you know, even if you get a few people who feel a little bit more confident, it can make an awful lot of difference and can actually be a good thing. However, in the same way that you have kind of discussions and debates going on nationally, they will also have an impact on reporting because people will be commenting on that. I'm going to try and wind up quite soon, please, because I think we've had a great session. We've got a few small bits that people have put in the chat. So Jenny Campbell said, how are these people going to be fed back to? Yemi's in particular has been an absolute star and said she'd kind of try and find out quite a lot from a number of different people. We can email out on the Eventbrite link, check your spam, check your junk folder, and we'll email out any of the responses that come back from people. And also, yeah, I think that's the main thing. And also people are asking, how can they get involved? And certainly, I know Yemi, you're always up for engaging with other people, and you're giving your contact details on that on the presentation. Also, if you're interested in this area, NREC is currently recruiting for a part-time role. So please, you know, do go on our website, do go on our website and check out details of that. Also to say, again, we have a number of other events that are happening, many of them happening in collaboration with Support Northamptonshire. So thank you again, Fatima, for enabling us to do that. So I'm just going to share my screen with a couple of them. And so firstly, on the 7th of October, we've got a NREC event about Black Lives Matter. If you can't find the Eventbrite, just email us, and we'll make sure that you get involved in that. Also, we've got another event focusing on Wellingborough, which is just around the Black Lives Matter and the Northamptonshire Rights and Equality Council 9-point plan, and what should a plan look like in Wellingborough. And again, that's on the 1st of October. Again, if you can't find the link for it, please email us, we'll let you know. And also really, really importantly, we have a series of workshops taking place in October and November. This is for people who really want to do something about racism. This is not about this is not hate or anti-racist training. This is a series of workshops working with a national organisation called Equality Hours to help shift public attitudes on equality. It will be talking about strategic messaging, and it will be talking about means in which actually we can have a local campaign to try and shift the narrative on hate and race, and again helpfully supported by Support Northamptonshire and funded by the Northamptonshire Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner. Again, because these workshops, you will have, if you want to get involved, we're asking people to commit to 2 separate sessions, and they're linked together, as you can see. And if you want more details, again, go to our website or email us for details, and we'll email that out. And just lastly to say again, a massive thank you to Yemi and Ben. Thank you so much for giving up your time to do this, and also thank you for everyone who attended. We've had some amazing questions that really cut right to the quick in terms of what was happening. And I just want to also again hand it back to Fatima. Fatima, if you want to just have some closing comments about the session, and again thank you everyone for attending. So Fatima, let me unmute you. So you can try and unmute yourself. Yes, you're unmuted.
Thanks, Angela. I'm so conscious of people's time, and many thanks for staying on. Great turnout. Massive thank you to Yemi. Yemi, I've heard several presentations, but this has kind of really nailed some of the factual stuff that we all needed to know. And there's more, I know, kind of we could have got even more data. And I think data and information is critical to this debate, you know. We need to know what's really happening to be able to tackle it. And Ben, thank you for that kind of wider perspective, you know, that we needed. And one thing for us, I think, is also that Northamptonshire is not linked into that national network, and it's a real missing piece, you know. So it's something I'm sure you know, people who are involved in this, and Yemi would be kind of championing some join with that, because I think to join regionally and nationally is really important. Massive thank you to NREC for kind of hosting this. It's always really difficult to have virtual events, but Anjana, thank you so much for pulling it off, and great debate. Please join us for the other events which are coming up. And for those people who are local to the Victoria Ward and ICE Ward, the Safer Streets investment of £500,000 is so key. So if you want to make those areas safe, please join us on the 24th at the Highfield Community Centre. Okay, thank you.